Greetings everybody, I'm obviously Jesus and we're gonna get right into this motherfucker because A, I'm sick, and B, I gotta take my camera in for repairs because that Orangina I mentioned in a couple videos back is still fucking with the radial wheel and I can't change the aperture in video mode, which as you might imagine is a bit of a problem for somebody who makes videos for cash dollars and stuff. But anyway, this is the fourth video for the month of September 2017 here on the Obviously Jesus Patreon. We're going to get right into it. Like I said, I was going to print out my notes for this, but my printer decided to take a shit while I was away. So there's going to be a lot of very unprofessional me looking down at my phone. It's not going to be very entertaining, but that's basically the only way I could get my my notes and the question itself that's going to jumpstart this video out here with me. But anyway, let's start with the question itself. It's a lot of multi-part things. I'm not even sure at this point what I'm going to call this video. I'm just focused on, responding to all the different points that this dude lays out. The question comes from Trills, and I'm now going to read it in full, basically, and you can read along on the screen if I don't forget to put the question in the video, like I always fucking do lately, it seems. Anyway, question goes, if you're not getting much suggestions, I was also curious to know if you have any regrets about the Woody's gamertag incident that went viral and jump-started your original channel. You also seem to be much more serious in your videos than I remember. I'm honestly kind of surprised you're a liberal and not part of the alt-right or anti-PC crowd, considering the kind of humor that you brought to the original channel. Was this due to a change in maturity or an intentional choice to attract a different audience? I would imagine most of your fans back then would now be part of the alt-right movement, and once your current channel goes public, which is not a thing I'm going to do, but they're going to be disappointed or angry with your current political stance. So that's basically, it's a lot of stuff. It is a lot of stuff to cover, and we're going to cover it pretty quickly, hopefully. Also, as usual, I'm not wearing any pants. There's a nice breeze blowing up my junk right now, and I haven't shaved in 5 million years, so it's like the wind blowing through the jungle on a smooth, juicy summer's day. So yeah, anyway, once Dropbox gets the fuck out of the way and lets me actually see the notes that I took, we'll get started. And there it is. Anyway, we're actually going to talk about Woody at the end because it's probably the biggest of all the big things that I'm going to talk about in this video. But I do want to say one thing up front, which is that Woody didn't jumpstart my channel. I mean, I was already, when that whole Woody business happened, I was pretty close to leaving YouTube at that point. I think that was like the last major phase of my my time there on YouTube, actually. So Woody didn't jumpstart my channel. He gave me a lot of views at the time, I will say that much, and it did increase the money I made for, a short period of time there based on all the little 13-year-old children who are coming to, try to insult me and whatnot. And those children are like probably like almost old enough to vote by now, which is kind of, scary when you think about it. But I was already pretty established. I already had basically hit my peak subscriber count at that point. So the idea that Woody jump-started my channel in any real way, besides, giving me a short-term burst of views was, that's basically pretty much, inaccurate. I was already, like I said, at the peak of my subscribers. I was already doing, philosophical stuff a lot of the time, I'm pretty sure. So, I mean, he didn't like give me a bunch of long-term subscribers or anything and, reformed my channel or anything like that. But anyway, like I said, we're going to talk about the main issues I had with him at the end of the video because it's the biggest topic. But we're going to quickly move on to the other stuff that this dude Trills raised. Did I say his name before? I don't know. We're just going to keep on fucking trucking because I got to get this fucking camera body to the repair shop. It's like a challenge. It's like a race. It's pretty sexual. I'm quite hard under this table. I'm just extremely turgid right now. Anyway, as for the insinuation that I'm more serious than before, and insinuation is the wrong word because he basically just came out and said it, but as for the idea that I'm more serious than before, I suppose I am. I think that, it's a consequence, throwing at my phone. It's a consequence not only of the format of the Patreon, where I'm trying to be very direct and focused and more, honing in on the subject that I'm trying to talk about, and there's less time for silliness and whatnot. But I do think it's accurate to say that I have also become a little bit more serious as I've gotten older. My sense of humor has definitely changed. I wouldn't say that it has necessarily lessened, but it's definitely a lot more, timing oriented and restrained, as opposed to the kind of, just spewing out random garbage that I used to do when I was first doing YouTube and wanted to, set myself apart from all my, contemporaries back in like 2008, 2009. So, man, that's almost 10 years ago. How fucking nuts is that? That is beyond fucking nuts to me. But anyway, I do think I've gotten more serious as I've gotten older, and it's also basically just a consequence of, the Patreon format. I'm not necessarily trying to attract a different audience. I mean, I'll be honest, a lot of the Patreon things, banked on, a returning audience of people who were interested in my more philosophical content that I was making towards the end of my time on YouTube. So I wouldn't say I'm looking for a different audience, but I can definitely see how this comes across as a lot more serious than I used to be. As to the whole bit about the alt-right, there's really nothing at all about the alt-right that appeals to me. And, it's not like they're even like the libertarians, really, who are trying to stand for something. I talked a couple of videos back about the, excuse me, still kind of having a sore throat and shit, but I got my cough drops over to the side. But anyway, there's really nothing about the alt-right that appeals to me. They aren't like the libertarians who are, in all their misguided glory that I talked about a couple videos ago, trying to, stand for something, stand for individuality, stand for, this, that, and the other thing. They're really just super obnoxious Republicans, and they refuse to basically hide the racism, sexism, xenophobia, et cetera, that normal, traditional Republicans tend to hide in, their voting habits and, the legislation that their elected representatives pass. So basically, I was never, it's weird to me that, because I agree, and we'll talk about this in a second, that that a lot of my fans probably identify, or might identify more than, I would like, with the alt-right. A lot of the people who have been with me from the beginning of my YouTube career, especially when I was more, taboo breaking and offensive and obnoxious. I understand why, I understand that a lot of them might identify now with the alt-right, because that seems to be, a thing. It seems to be a thing that, lines up with each other. But it doesn't make sense to me, because I was never an advocate of the two-party system. I think the two-party system is the worst thing. It's like, it dumbs down all the nuance of politics and all the different positions that one might have to, a red versus blue, stupid-ass basic sports analogy thing. And how I feel about sports, it's fucking stupid. It's dumb. It's, made for the consumption of the simpleton masses, basically. So, by definition, the alt-right, who, define themselves as basically a more extreme version of the right of Republicans, why would, I don't think I ever set the precedent for, my fans to like that, because I've always decried the two-party system, and, being a more extreme version of one of those parties is not anything. It's banal. It's stupid. All you're doing is being the most obnoxious version of a Republican that you can be, and that, to me, is nothing of any, interest at all. It is just completely stupid and banal, like I said. But anyway, like I said, I do acknowledge that there is a certain sect of my fan base that identifies with that alt-right ideology. I mean, I can see some sort of overlap with how I used to be a really big, advocate of breaking taboos. And, the alt-right, though, they refuse to respect a lot of these, social taboos, not based on the idea that taboos are holding society back in a way. They're doing it out of basically the fear of what is called in philosophy the other, that which is different from you, something that you can identify with, be it the opposite gender, or different genders, or people from a different country, people of a different religion, etc., etc. I never had any issues with non-whites, Jews, Muslims, women, gays, all these people, all these groups rather, for which the alt-right has genuine, real contempt. I mean, I think, and we'll talk a little bit about this later as well, I think my issue was with these taboos themselves, as the idea that keeping things cloistered, and certain people could only say certain words. My idea was that by limiting parts of language and trying to defend your quote unquote reclaimed words or whatever from other races using them, you're holding back society, because at the time my opinion was, and still to some degree is in some certain cases, that by creating more division, you are in effect becoming what you're trying to defeat. And the alt-right isn't concerned with that sort of ideology at all, in any way, shape, or form. They literally just have hatred for people of other cultures, religions, genders, etc., etc. It's a very white male thing, and my channel was never a big, it was never about being white or a guy. Nothing, I was never defending, the idea that white men are under attack, which is completely and totally absurd. Taboo breaking wasn't my only thing, though. Like, I also talked a lot about the philosophies of absurdism and existentialism, and you can't say that Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus were not precursors of the alt-right in any way, shape, or form. They are basically the polar opposite of that. So it does puzzle me, like I said, why there is like a sect of old, obviously Jesus fans who might identify with that whole alt-right bit. And the alt-right seems to be the place for white male isolationist loners. And let's be honest, I have basically always fit that description in terms of being by myself, and of course being a white dude. But being sick, I fucking hate it. Where was I? But I guess the idea, or I guess the difference is, the chief difference is that I don't need this, arbitrary other to, rail against, and to put my general frustration at the universe into, a specific target. Because I think a lot of the times that's what's happening with the alt-right. I think that they're generally, angry at, maybe they're angry at a specific woman for breaking their hearts, and they generalize that to all women. Maybe they're angry at, somebody of a different religion or skin color for whatever reason, and they generalize that to the entire group of people. I've never felt the need to do that. So even though I've been, hurt by the, events of my life a lot, I don't think I've ever felt the need to take that anger, take that, isolation and sorrow, and turn it on an entire group of people. So I think that is the prime difference between me and, the alt-right. And I would hope that, if anybody out there is seeing this video who thinks they identify with the alt-right, that they seriously consider their position and say, okay, maybe I'm going a bit overboard here. But yeah, it's kind of sad, but it's something I've got to live with. That but I never wanted to see myself as the precursor to this garbage ass, fucking terrible, reactionary alt-right movement, which frankly disgusts me. All right, chugging right along, I also want to address the idea that I am not part of the anti-PC crowd. I still think that I straddle a line here a little bit, because I'm not full on, PC. I've become less of a taboo breaker and somebody who literally, just seeks out taboos to, throw them in the faces of the people who care about them. As I've gotten older, that's very true. But I still do hold some, anti-PC beliefs. I mean, I don't think that I really accomplished anything. I certainly didn't, accomplish what I was setting out to do when I would use all sorts of, racially charged language back in the early days of the Obviously Jesus channel, when I was trying to basically prove that, nothing is sacred, that, holding yourself back when you're, not refusing to say these taboo words and, talk about taboo subjects. I don't really think I accomplished anything. I don't think anymore that that's the way to go about it. But I still do hold some anti-PC views, I suppose, that you might call them. Like, for example, I don't think that anything productive is being done when people get upset, when white people, and this is especially appropriate for, the Halloween season, which is coming up next month. I don't think that getting upset and demanding apologies when people or white people dress up as like a Native American or a geisha or something like that, I don't think that is a thing that you need to be upset about. And I think when I say this, I'm thinking about the future. I'm thinking about the far future where, Earth is one of many global societies in the universe. I mean, how are we ever going to be a global society with global concerns if when white people want to dress up as something that isn't theirs for fun and they're not even trying to harm anybody, people get up in arms and upset? How are we ever going to be a global society with global goals when people get upset over something as innocuous as a Halloween costume? So I still think that that's completely absurd. There's a difference between, casually treating somebody's culture and something that's important to them as a costume and like actual malicious cultural erasure. When I was in Scotland, I was on a day trip, and the tour guide talked a lot about how, the I forget if it was the English or like the main Scottish government, but I believe it was the English. But basically, somebody went up into the Scottish Highlands, and they basically were trying to, systemically eradicate the speech, the language up there in the Scottish Highlands, which is called Gaelic. And they were trying to erase the Gaelic language as basically a tool of suppression of, Scottish resistance against the crown, basically. So, that is a big example of the difference between people who are, just trying to dress up as something they've seen in culture versus an actual example of, of cultural erasure and eradication. And I think we need to, distinguish far better between those two. Because if your culture is important to you, a white person dressing up as, in a fucking Native American headdress, it doesn't subtract from your culture. I can understand why you might not like it, but I mean, it's a thing. It exists. People have seen pictures of Native Americans and their outfits, and some people like those outfits. They exist in the world. How can you just cling to that image? How can you just, not say, okay, well, they're going to go have their stupid fun and not going to appreciate the cultural significance of, Native American garb and whatnot, but who cares? You still appreciate, if you're a Native American, the significance of the cultural garb and whatnot. They can't take that away from you. They're not trying to eradicate that from you. So I do think a better distinction needs to be made, and I think that it's an example of an anti-PC opinion that I still do hold. Also, while we're on the topic of, PC and social justice stuff, Superhands asked me a question as to why I identify as a progressive, and this might become its own video. There's a lot of points and stuff we've talked about or that he sent me on Steam that might become its own video. But just as a quick aside, I identify as a progressive person because, progressives believe, I'm just going to read from my list here because otherwise I'm going to ramble and ramble. Progressives believe in bodily autonomy for all people, that believe in protecting the environment because there's no alternative planet that we can go to. I mean, if Earth was one of many planets that we lived on as a society and we can just jet from one to the other, then, maybe I'd be less concerned about this. But, Earth is our one planet, so progressives believe in defending the environment, so that's important to me as a person who wants to have a place to live. They refuse to accept that people should suffer or die because, of something as petty as lack of funds. And then they oppose money in politics. They oppose police corruption and abuse of authority. And when the alt-right is on the side of the police. And maybe this is just because I hate cops, but when you're siding with the racist police officers and you're part of the alt-right, then maybe that's not the right side to be on. To all the alt-right sympathizers out there, maybe when you're, siding with the C students who now have badges and guns and tempers, that's not the place you want to be politically, on the same side as those fucking troglodytes who get to carry live ammunition. I don't know, but just a thought. Basically, why I'm a progressive is because progressives have historically been on the right side of history with regards to a lot of issues like, women's suffrage, desegregation, basically things like that that are gimmies for most people nowadays. But, back in the day when it was a struggle, the progressives were always there on that side. So basically, I'm identifying as a progressive these days because I like what they stand for. And, I just listed off all the things that they stand for that I agree with. So that's basically the distinction that I have, chosen to give myself. I don't like belonging to any particular group, but when I identify with a lot of the causes and the opinions of a particular group, I'm not gonna shy away from it because if that's what you stand for, those things that I listed, if that's what you stand for, then I'm in agreement, and I'm might as well not avoid that distinction altogether. I don't go to meetings and rallies. I refuse to be the part of any group. I don't protest. I don't like people chanting. I don't know, maybe this is just me, but I don't like people chanting anything for any reason, no matter how much I agree with it. I don't like chants or slogans, so I certainly wouldn't go to an alt-right protest. I distrust that, but I also distrust, the counter-protesters, like the people who were in Boston Common last month or whatever, chanting, no Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA. I don't like slogans. I don't know, it feels like groupthink. It feels like a hive mind, and I hate it. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't, go to a protest or anything because I have weird reservations about that, I guess. But now, let's talk about Woody. And forgive me for breezing through this because I already talked about this, but my lap mic's battery died and I was coughing throughout the whole thing. So I'm going to re-record it with a working microphone, and I'm just going to go, point by point because I already did sort of like a big, I went off topic and all that shit. So let's avoid that. I will say, this is going to be a subject or a topic or a segment or whatever you want to call it for, older, obviously, Jesus fans. But for those of you who don't know, I had this tiff with this YouTube guy. I used to play COD and Minecraft and all that garbage that was popular back in the day. He basically had a special needs son and would advertise over footage of a special needs son and would talk in great detail about the medical conditions of the special needs son. So I took umbrage with that. He likes to bring it up every now and then because he feels personally attacked. Every time he brings it up, he invents new things, that I did or supposedly said or threatened to do. And so the tale that he tells on his Failing Painkiller Already podcast, where he, brings on washed up stars like Harley Morenstein from, Epic Mealtime and other, people that, you've never heard of. I mean, somewhere along the line, he must have alienated Wings of Redemption and FPS Kyle or whoever the hell he used to do that garbage with. But, his favorite thing to do is every now and then, every couple months, somebody comes and sends me a message saying, "Oh, Woody mentioned you on Painkiller Already," and the tale has gotten, more exorbitant and ridiculous and full of fabrications. But his favorite fabrication is the idea that I once said that I was going to rape his daughter. I believe that this is born out of a hypothetical I once did where I, it got a little out of control. I will say that I never threatened to rape his daughter, of course, but at one point I did think that it was relevant to make a hypothetical where I said, on Twitter or something, what if somebody threatened to rape your daughter? I don't know what this was in reference to or at what point this was supposed to make, but I honestly have no idea the context of it, but I know for a fact And I never said I was actually going to rape his daughter. It's an absurd fabrication that he loves to bring up every couple of months when he wants to, play the victim on his podcast in between selling, card packs for Elder Scrolls Legends, a shitty game Hearthstone ripoff that I'm sure he has never played in his goddamn life. But anyway, I digress. If there is one thing I will say before my battery dies or something, or my camera randomly stops recording, I will say that I do regret that I, talked about this, in my old way. I wish that, this was an issue that I had tackled when I had gained a little bit more maturity. I think, my zany humor and, over-the-top offensive antics probably weren't the best fit for trying to make a serious point about somebody who I truly believe in my heart of hearts to this day was failing their child as a parent. Probably not the best fit there, probably something that I wish I had done differently, but again, I never said something as abominable as I was going to rape his daughter because, I defy anybody to find me, proof of, that tweet, that YouTube video, whatever the hell it was supposedly said in. I defy anybody to find me proof of that because it never fucking happened. Excuse me while I cough the living shit out of my lungs right now. My point back then and now is that, using your child in videos and discussing his mental condition in detail is not only a massive breach of that kid's right to privacy, but also a failure of your duty as a parent to protect your child. Your child is not your property. You don't get to detail their life story or their medical history, of all things, without their informed consent to literally hundreds of thousands of strangers who are your subscribers on the goddamn internet. Woody's son's issues belong to Woody's son first and foremost. And I'm just going to call him Colin because, like me, his name is Colin. So I'm going to refer to him as that so I don't have to keep saying Woody's son this, Woody's son that. But anyway, your child is not your property. And that's something that Woody doesn't seem to really understand. And his defense has always been that, if he didn't talk about it, if he didn't talk about his kid, then he'd be guilty of being ashamed of his kid. And, Woody should feel free to talk in general terms about how having a special needs son affects him as a dad. But, to go into the child's medical history is just a complete breach of that kid's, excuse me, his expectations of privacy. He's not going to grow up with a normal, healthy set of boundaries. And that's the thing that really is breaking down in the Woody's Gamertag family, I think, because, Woody is guilty of, over-exhibition of not only his son, but of his entire family. And he's not the only one by any means. There's an entire, generation of YouTube famous kids who were raised without the, the reasonable expectations of privacy. You look at the Shaytards are probably the most, prominent example. But Woody was the one in my sphere, and that was the one, so he was the person that I decided to go after to prove this point. But, to get back to my little very neatly bullet pointed, dotted lines here, talking about your son in general terms and talking about how it affects you as a parent is not breaching, any kind of, parental trust or boundary. But to detail his medical history to, all these subscribers in specific detail, that is not, you don't have to be concerned about being ashamed of your son. You should be concerned about protecting his story, his issues, his narrative. He gets to determine that narrative, and that's what Woody seems to fail to understand. It's grossly irresponsible to put anybody's medical information out there. That's why we have confidentiality between doctor and patient, and parents should seek to replicate that even though they're not technically legally obligated to. Woody knows how vicious the internet can be. His kid does not, and depending on the severity of this kid's mental issues, he may never. But even if nobody ever does anything to Colin with this information having been out there on YouTube for years, and I'm sure it's still out there because Woody doesn't recognize that he's doing something wrong. Even if nobody ever touches him in any negative way with this information or uses it to try to gain advantage of it over him in any way, shape, or form, it's still Colin's right to choose when and if and who and how people hear his story. It's not Woody's story. Woody is a bit player, or not a bit player even. He's a secondary character. He's a supporting actor in Colin's story. And it's Colin's right to choose when and how and to whom his story gets revealed. That's what you should be afraid of violating, not being, ashamed of your kid because you're respecting his fucking boundaries. That's what you should be worried about, Woody, you fucking moron. It's not his father's right. The kid isn't property. You don't get to choose when somebody hears your kid's story, no matter how old they are. It's their right. And if you think that, you want to wait till they're 18, that's so long, well, too bad. It's long, but it's his right. You have to wait to preserve his determination over his own narrative. If Colin wants to grow up and be a mental health awareness advocate for his specific condition, that is his right to choose when he's older and informed and has his own YouTube channel or other platform on which to do it. It is not it's not a choice that somebody else gets to make for him when he was like 8. I think he was 8 at this time. I could be wrong. It might have been 12 or something. I don't know. But, basically, it's his narrative. He should have the right to determine that. And that was my whole point back then. And, add to that the massive disclosure of, medical information. Add to that the fact that he's monetizing these videos and talking about, oh, I'm sitting on the toilet playing this stupid mobile game that he's never played in his life, and then he cuts to a video of his son, on some weird like skateboard thing in his kitchen. That doesn't sit right with me either. Because I thought, if my father had talked about my experience and the problem I was having with my parents' divorce when I was 8 years old and all the, resultant mental anguish that came from that, if my father was talking about that in my perspective on the internet, then I would never have forgiven him. I never would have done that. So I try to put myself in this young kid's shoes who happens to have the same name as me. And, I try to imagine what it would feel like to have a parent betray my, privacy and trust from the benefit of being an older person. So basically, I was trying to help this kid in a roundabout way that was probably inappropriate at the time, in the way I did it and how, offensive I would be and all that stuff. But this really did come from a place of concern because, if my father or my mother had done, a fraction of what Woody was doing at the time with his kid, I would never have forgiven them. I would cease to have spoken to them. And, it's really, I really do think it's an immense breach of boundaries. It's an immense failure as a parent. And I don't think that trying to, take care of your kid and letting them determine your own narrative constitutes being ashamed of your son, because that's not an equivalency. It's not an equivalency. And Woody's other line of defense has always been that, oh, Colin enjoys being in the videos. He, doesn't mind. Lack of objection and, or even enjoying being in the videos is not informed consent, especially when you're dealing with a child, especially when you're dealing with a child with mental issues. So, you can't just say that, oh, he doesn't mind, so it's all right. You're not, you're not nearly taking enough precautions to protect your child. And I think that, as a child who was not protected adequately by my own parents in various ways that are very different to this specific situation, I think that, protecting your child is probably the most important issue you face as a parent. And, here's this guy on the internet named Woody's Gamertag, which is a stupid fucking name. And here he is failing, in my opinion, catastrophically as a parent in one of the worst ways you could possibly theorize. So that was why I went after him. That was, my big issue with him. And that's probably all I really have to say about that. But anyway, I'm obviously Jesus. I have to get my camera to the repair shop now. I've been coughing a lot. That's why there's been a lot of hard cuts in this last part of the video. So I need to go, drink some nice chamomile tea and not talk anymore because, yeah, this is very painful right now. Thanks for watching, though. Submit me your ideas in the comment section on YouTube or Patreon. And as always, look forward to the next video, which will be the first video for the month of October 2017. Thanks for sticking with me. I'm obviously Jesus. Talk to you later.